What kind of man marries a stranger covered in mud before he even knows her name? Matthew Caldwell never thought he would become that man. Yet one desperate choice was about to change every part of his life. The evening sun spread over the Wyoming plains like a warm river of fire. The wind pushed long waves through the tall grass around Caldwell Ranch. Horses grazed near the fences. Ranch hands finished their chores and headed toward their bunks. Matthew Caldwell stood alone near the old fence post, wiping sweat from his brow. He had worked since sunrise, but a strange feeling kept tugging at him all afternoon. Something was coming. Something big. Matthew was 32, tall and broad, a quiet cowboy who tried to stay out of trouble. He had grown up on hard land and learned early how fragile a life could be. His father had died in a range fight, and Matthew had spent the years since guarding the ranch and guarding his heart. Folks respected him for his honesty and his steady hands, but respected little to fill a lonely house. He kept to himself, worked the land, and tried not to think about the emptiness that settled in his chest each night. He leaned against the fence, looking down the dusty trail. Nothing moved, not a soul. Still, that odd prickle worked up the back of his neck. It warned him the way a storm warns cattle. He took a breath, waiting for something he could not yet name. Then he saw it. A shape, small at first, unsteady, moving toward the ranch. Matthew straightened and narrowed his eyes. The shape wavered. A person. No, two. As the figures drew closer, his chest tightened. A woman was staggering across the last stretch of land, covered head to toe in dried mud, her hair matted to her face. In her arms she carried a limp child, a boy no older than 8 or 9. The child's head rolled weakly against her shoulder. Dust stuck to both of them. Every step the woman took looked like a battle. Matthew did not hesitate. He turned and called over his shoulder, "Ben, saddle up. Someone's in trouble." Quote. Ben Randall, his right hand on the ranch, dropped the hay bale he had been carrying and rushed for a horse. Matthew swung himself onto his mare and kicked off toward the struggling pair. When he reached them, the sight hit him like a blow. The woman's dress was torn and stiff with dried mud. Her lips were cracked. Her arms shook as she tried to keep the child close to her chest. The boy looked pale, his breathing shallow. Matthew slid off his horse and ran to her. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Can you hear me?" The woman opened her mouth, but only a scratchy sound came out. She tried again, lifting her chin with the last shred of strength she had. "Please," she whispered, "help my boy." Her knees buckled. Matthew caught her before she hit the ground. Ben arrived seconds later with a wagon. Together they lifted the woman and her child into it. Matthew could feel how light the boy was, how hot his skin burned with fever. Fear struck him harder than any fist. He turned to Ben. "Right ahead. Tell Mrs. White to prepare hot water. Send for the doctor. Now." Ben sped away like a bullet. Matthew climbed into the wagon, knees in the dirt, holding the boy steady as they rushed toward the ranch house. The child shivered in his arms. The woman lay beside them, eyes closed, her chest rising only slightly with each breath. Matthew did not know who they were or where they came from. He only knew one truth. If he did not act fast, the boy would die. The ranch house burst with movement the moment they arrived. Mrs. Rosemary White, the cook and caretaker, hurried forward, gasping when she saw the child's condition. "He's burning up," she said, touching the boy's forehead. "Bring him to the fire, quickly." Matthew carried him inside. 2 ranch hands helped the mother into the guest room. Her body went slack on the bed, exhausted beyond consciousness. Matthew knelt beside the boy in the main room. He soaked a cloth in cool water and pressed it to the child's forehead. The fire crackled nearby, the only sound in the tight air. The boy's breaths were faint and fast. "Hold on," Matthew murmured. "Just hold on." Quote. Lucy Thompson awoke hours later, her body aching, her mind spinning. At first she did not know where she was. The walls were wooden. Warm light flickered from a lamp. Her clothes were clean, the mud was gone from her skin. When she tried to sit, a sharp pain pressed through her ribs. "Easy now," a woman's voice said. Mrs. White stepped into view, her kind face lined with concern. "Your boy is in the next room. The doctor is with him. You're safe here." Safe. Lucy had not felt safe in years. She pushed herself upright. "Jonah," she whispered. "I need to see him." Mrs. White helped her to her feet and guided her down the hall. When they reached the main room, Lucy froze. The child lay on a sofa near the fire. His face pale, his breathing shallow. Dr. James Whitman knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Matthew Caldwell stood close, hands on his hips, worry carved into every line of his face. Lucy rushed forward. "Is he?" she choked. "Is he alive?" Dr. Whitman lifted his gaze. "He's alive," he said gently, "but he is very sick. Fever this strong can take a child fast. He needs rest, medicine, and constant care. He must not travel." Lucy pressed her hand to her mouth. Her knees wobbled. Matthew stepped closer. "He's staying here," he said. "Both of you are." Lucy looked up at him. A stranger, a cowboy she had never met. Yet he stood like a man ready to fight the whole world to keep her son alive. In that moment she did not know it, but this ranch, this man, and this desperate fight for her boy would change everything. Her life, his life, Jonah's fate, all of it was about to turn. Matthew Caldwell did not sleep that night. The ranch house stayed lit long after the sky turned black. He sat near the fire, watching Jonah's chest rise and fall in uneven waves. Lucy lay on a cot Mrs. White brought into the room, waking every few minutes to check her son's face. Each time she opened her eyes, she found Matthew still there, silent and steady, like a guardian carved from stone. By morning, Jonah's fever had eased to just enough to give them hope. Dr. Whitman stayed through the night and prepared medicine from the supplies Matthew kept for the ranch hands. The doctor wiped sweat from his brow and sighed. "He's still in danger," he said, "but he's fighting, and you caught him in time." Lucy bowed her head as relief shook her body. Matthew stepped forward. "He'll get whatever he needs. You have my word." Lucy turned to him, her voice trembled with gratitude and fear. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," he answered softly. "A child's life is worth saving." But as the day passed, Lucy's uneasy thoughts kept returning. She had nothing, no money, no wagon, no family. Jonah needed weeks, maybe months, of care, and she could offer nothing in return. That evening, Mrs. White guided Lucy to the small washroom. The warm water stung her scraped hands, but it soothed her spirit. When she returned, Matthew was standing by the window, staring out at the ranch yard. His face was set with something heavy. "Lucy," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Her heart thudded. "Is Jonah worse?" "No," he said quickly, "not that. Something else." Quote. Lucy lowered herself into the chair across from him, her legs still weak from days of exhaustion. Matthew removed his hat and held it against his chest. "The doctor and I spoke about Jonah's care. He said the boy needs stability. Travel could kill him." Lucy nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. But there's another problem," Matthew went on. "You and your boy staying here. The law is strange about that. An unmarried woman in a bachelor's home can stir trouble. Folks talk. And if anyone wants to challenge your right to stay, they can." Lucy stiffened. "I can work for you. I can cook, clean, whatever you." "This isn't about work," Matthew said gently. "It's about protection. Your boy needs long-term care, and the only way to give him that without the law interfering is if you stay here as family." Lucy frowned. "Family? I don't." Matthew took a breath. "Lucy, what I'm saying is marriage. A paper marriage, a legal marriage, nothing more unless time changes it." The room went still. Lucy stared at him, speechless. "You don't know me," she whispered. "And you don't know me," he replied. "But I know your son needs help, and I know how this territory works. A married woman with a child has rights. A single woman with no money has none." Lucy's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? This is your home, your life. Matthew looked toward Jonah, who slept in the next room. I won't let that boy die. If marriage is what protects him, then yes, I'm sure. Lucy pressed her hands to her face as silent sobs shook her shoulders. Not from fear, but from a kind of hope she had not felt in years. Matthew stepped closer. If you say no, I'll still help, but it won't protect you the way a marriage will. Lucy looked up, tears trailing down her cheeks. Matthew, if this is the only way to save Jonah, then yes, I will marry you. The relief that washed through Matthew's eyes was quiet, but deep. He nodded once, as if sealing an oath. Then we'll do it today, he said. Before anyone can question it. Word spread across the ranch before sunset. A preacher was called from the nearby settlement. Mrs. White rushed around, brushing Lucy's hair and finding a clean dress for her. The dress was loose and plain, but to Lucy, it felt like the finest gown in the world. Her hands shook as she smoothed the fabric. When was the last time someone cared this much for you? Mrs. White asked gently. Lucy's voice cracked. Never. Outside, under the fading orange sky, Matthew stood waiting. His shirt was clean. His hat rested in his hands. His face carried a seriousness that made Lucy's heart twist. The preacher cleared his throat and began the short ceremony. The ranch hands stood back in quiet respect. The breeze rustled through the grass. A horse snorted softly in the distance. Do you, Matthew Caldwell, take this woman? I do, Matthew said without hesitation. And do you, Lucy Thompson? Lucy looked up at the man who had offered her safety, a home, and hope when she had nothing left to give. I do, she whispered. And just like that, two strangers were joined by law, by need, and by something neither of them understood yet. The preacher smiled and closed his Bible. By the authority given to me by the state of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. But before anyone could breathe, the sound of pounding hooves echoed across the ranch yard. A rider galloped toward them, dust billowing behind him. His face twisted with anger, his coat torn, his eyes wild. Luke Carter, one of the ranch hands, shouted, Matthew, he's armed! Lucy's breath caught. The rider yanked his horse to a stop and pointed straight at her. You! He roared. Lucy Thompson? Matthew stepped in front of her instantly. Who are you? He demanded. The man spat in the dirt. Name's Stephen Thompson, her husband. Lucy's knees nearly buckled. Matthew's hand moved to the gun at his hip. You abandoned her. Stephen sneered. She's mine, and so is that boy. I'm here to take him. Lucy grabbed Matthew's sleeve, panic tearing through her chest. Jonah needed safety. This man was the danger she had run from. Matthew stepped forward, his voice low and steady. You'll go through me first. Stephen swung down from his horse, rage burning in his eyes. Then, so be it. Quote, the ranch yard held its breath. The fight for Jonah had begun. Stephen Thompson's boots hit the ground hard as he marched toward Matthew, fury shaking every step. The ranch hands circled without a word, hands near their holstered guns, ready to defend their boss if the stranger made one wrong move. The air felt tight, as if the Wyoming wind itself held its breath. Lucy stood frozen behind Matthew, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own thoughts. She had escaped this man once. She had prayed she'd never see him again, but now he stood only yards away, claiming the one thing that mattered more than her own life. My boy, Stephen growled, pointing a shaking finger, is coming with me. Matthew didn't budge. He stepped forward with slow, controlled calm. Your boy is sick inside my home, fighting for his life. You weren't there for him. You don't get to walk in now and take him. Stephen laughed, a sharp, angry sound. You think marrying her makes you his father? You ain't nobody. I have rights. Matthew tilted his head. You abandoned those rights the day you walked out. Stephen's hand snapped toward the revolver on his belt. Before he could draw, Matthew lunged. The two men crashed into the dirt. The ranch hands moved, but Matthew shouted, Stay back! As he fought to wrestle the gun from Stephen's grip. Dust flew. Horses stamped nervously. Lucy covered her mouth. terrified for both men. Stephen swung wildly, landing a hit across Matthew's jaw. Matthew grunted but didn't let go. With a surge of strength, he slammed Stephen's hand into the ground. The gun slipped from Stephen's fingers and skidded through the dirt. Ben Randall rushed forward and grabbed it. Stephen roared in frustration. "You can't keep him from me!" Matthew stood, breathing hard, chest rising and falling in slow, angry waves. "I can, and I will! Sheriff Grant will hear about this." Stephen's eyes darted wildly as the ranch hands closed in, but instead of surrendering, he spat at the ground and pointed at Lucy. "You're not safe here," Stephen hissed. "None of you are." Quote. Then he mounted his horse with a jerk, wheeled it around and thundered away, dust trailing behind him like a warning. Lucy's legs finally gave out, and she fell to her knees. Matthew hurried to her side, gently lifting her up. "He's gone," he said softly. "For now." But Lucy shook her head, her voice trembling. "He's not done. Men like him never give up." Matthew held her steady. "Then neither will I." For the next few weeks, fear hovered over the ranch like a storm cloud. Jonah continued to recover, slowly regaining strength, but the threat of Stephen's return weighed on Lucy's every breath. She jumped at sudden sounds. She watched the horizon from the porch, waiting for the dust cloud of a horse she hoped she'd never see again. Meanwhile, Matthew prepared. He spoke to the sheriff. He reinforced the ranch gates. The hands kept watch in shifts. And though he said nothing, Lucy could see how deeply he worried too, not just for Jonah, but for her. Yet life slowly healed around the fear. On warm afternoons, Jonah sat under the shade tree while Lucy read to him. Sometimes Matthew brought a pair of gentle horses close, so Jonah could pet them. The boy's eyes lit up each time Matthew taught him something new, whether it was brushing a mane or feeding the animals. One evening, Lucy stepped out onto the porch and found Matthew whittling wood, the way he often did to settle his mind. The breeze rolled across the grass, carrying the cool scent of the coming night. "You never asked me why I stayed this long?" Lucy said softly. Matthew didn't look up right away. His knife moved in slow, thoughtful strokes. "You don't owe me reasons." Lucy stepped closer. "I want to tell you anyway." He paused. "I stayed because Jonah needed this place," Lucy said. "But now, I stay because I want to. I don't feel lost here. I don't feel alone." Matthew finally lifted his eyes. He looked at her slowly, as if trying to read every word she didn't say. "And you?" Lucy whispered. "Do you want me to stay?" Quote. Matthew set the carved wooden horse aside. He stood, walked to her, and rested his hand over hers. "I don't want you to go," he said quietly. "Not now. Not ever." Quote. Lucy's breath shivered in her chest. For the first time in years, she felt safe. She felt chosen. But peace in the West never lasted long. 2 weeks later, word came from Judge James. Stephen had filed a petition for custody. A hearing was ordered. Lucy's heart nearly collapsed inside her chest. The courthouse was miles away. Jonah still wasn't strong enough for long travel. But if they ignored the summons, it would ruin their case. Matthew didn't hesitate. "We'll go together," he said. "We'll face this as a family." The morning of the hearing, Lucy dressed Jonah warmly and held him close in the wagon. Dr. Whitman joined them to testify about Jonah's fragile condition. Matthew drove with a firm grip on the reins, his jaw tight with determination. Inside the courthouse, the tension hit like a wall. Stephen stood in worn boots with 2 men in suits at his side. Lucy held Jonah's hand so tightly her fingers trembled. The judge listened to both sides. He heard Lucy's story of survival. He heard Stephen's excuses. He heard drive. Whitman explained that uprooting Jonah now could cause a life-threatening relapse. Then he asked Jonah a simple question. "Son, where do you want to live?" Jonah's voice shook as he answered, "With my ma and Mr. Caldwell. He saved my life." Silence flooded the room. Then the judge spoke. "Custody will remain with Mrs. Caldwell and her husband. The child stays with them until he is fully recovered. The father may reapply in 6 months if he can prove a stable and safe life. Lucy broke down in tears. Matthew wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Jonah leaned into both of them. They had won, for now. The ride home felt lighter. When they returned to the ranch, the hands cheered softly, not wanting to startle Jonah. Mrs. White cried openly and hugged Lucy tight. As days passed into weeks, Stephen didn't return. Rumors spread that he had run off after losing a fortune in a card game. Others said he left the territory entirely. Lucy chose not to care. For the first time in her life, she felt grounded, like roots had finally taken hold beneath her feet. And Matthew, he stayed by her side through every sunrise. One clear morning, Lucy stepped out to find Jonah riding a small pony with Matthew guiding the reins. Her son laughed, a full, bright sound she hadn't heard in years. Tears filled her eyes. Matthew looked at her over Jonah's shoulder. "He's got a strong seat," Matthew said with a smile. "He'll be riding on his own soon." Lucy felt her heart swell. "He's alive because of you." Matthew shook his head. "He's alive because of you. You never gave up." Lucy walked closer. The wind brushed her hair across her cheek. Matthew reached out and tucked it behind her ear. "You saved me too," he said quietly. Her throat tightened. "How?" "You brought life back to this place," he answered. "Back to me." In the soft morning light, with Jonah's laughter echoing across the ranch, Lucy leaned into Matthew's chest. He wrapped his arms around her, strong and warm, like the home she had never known. This marriage had begun as a desperate act of survival. But now it was something real, a family. A future, a love that had grown from dust, danger, and hope. Lucy had arrived at Caldwell Ranch covered in mud, broken and afraid. But she refused to leave, and because she stayed, she found a life better than anything she had ever imagined. A life where she was safe. A life where Jonah thrived. A life where Matthew loved her with quiet strength. Sometimes the wildest lands grow the strongest families. And sometimes a cowboy marries a stranger just to save her son, only to discover he saved his own heart too.